walk with the Lord in the light of His word. What a glory He sheds on our way. His good will, He abides with us still, and with all who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. Not a shadow can rise, not a cloud in the skies, but His smile quickly drives it away. Not a doubt nor a fear, not a sign nor a tear can abide while we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Not a burden we bear, not a sorrow we share, but only His mercy we pay. Not a grief nor a loss, not a frown nor a cross, but His blessed we trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. But we never can prove the delights of His love until all on the altar we lay. For the favor He shows and the joy He bestows are for those who will trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Then in fellowships we will sit at His feet, or will walk by His side in the way. What He says we will do, where He sends we will go. Never fear, only trust and obey. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus than to trust and obey. Wonderful. Good evening, friends and Facebook friends. I'm so much happy and grateful this evening to find this opportunity to continue on my yesterday lesson. Yesterday we looked at the overview of the New Testament survey on the book of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. And so today we're going to look on what Paul comes to correct about the false ideas that the false teachers were teaching in Thessalonica. Paul comes to correct these in 1st Thessalonians and in 2nd Thessalonians. And so in the first chapter, Paul commended, we see Paul commending the Thessalonian Christians for their work of faith and labor, of love and patience, of hope in our Lord Jesus Christ, in verses 1, in chapter 1, verses 3. So we see Paul reminding them of how powerful the gospel had come to them. And also Paul mentions how the word of God had gone forth from Thessalonica to many other areas, and to many other areas of him. And so others had heard of how they had turned from idols to serve the living God. That's from verses 5 to verses 10. But the Jews who had opposed Paul in Thessalonica and Berea were making false accusations against Paul. And so he defended himself in chapter 2, and Paul reminds the Christians how he and his companions had preached the gospel honestly and sincerely. And so they did not use flattering words or seek glory from men. When we read in verses 5 to 6, so they worked night and day to support themselves while preaching the gospel in verses 9 of chapter 2. And no one could honestly question their motives. And so when we come to the 3rd chapter of Paul, we see Paul expressing his great concern for the Christians, and which caused him to send Timothy, a young evangelist, back to them. And so he told his joy when he learned that they were standing firm in spite of persecution. And so now in the 4th chapter of 1 Thessalonians, we see Paul warning the Christians of the dangers of sexual immorality, and a common sin in the Roman world of the 1st century. Paul urged them to abstain from sinful relationships by possessing their own vessel, that is, their own wives, in sanctification and honor. And so, by doing this, they will not wrong their brothers, or they will not take advantage of them by becoming involved in their wives. When we read in verses 1 to verses 8 of 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. So this warning needs to be heeded by Christians today. We ought to follow the same example. We ought to follow the same teachings. We do not have to wrong for our brothers. We do not have to take. We don't have to take advantage to involve with our brothers' wives. Okay, we don't have to do that. So, but in the latter part of chapter 4, we see the first part of chapter 5, Paul correcting misunderstandings about the second coming of Jesus Christ. And so in verses 13 of chapter 4 and also in verses 13 of chapter 4 and in chapter 5 verses 11, and those who had died in Christ will not lose their word at his coming, but in fact they will be raised first before the living saints are called to meet the Lord in the air. So, brethren, no mention is ever made of the Lord setting foot on earth again, and at his coming, the earth and the works that are therein shall be burned up, in 2 Peter chapter 3 verses 10. And those who are caught up to be with the Lord will always be with him. And so the New Testament says nothing about so-called 7-year rapture, as false teachers in Thessalonica claimed. So rather than fear the second coming, Christians should be ready to meet the Lord whether he comes during their lifetime or after death, right? So these are some of the things that Paul writes and corrects in the book of 1 Thessalonians, from verses 1, chapter 1 to chapter 5. So back in 2 Thessalonians, that's the second letter to the Thessalonians, and which was written a few months after the first. The date was late 51 or early 52. So persecution against the church continued. And here we see Paul reminding the Christian that their persecution will be punished by Christ at his second coming. In chapter 1 of 2 Thessalonians, verses 6 to 10. So two mistaken ideas comes to be corrected in this episode of 2 Thessalonians. And the first was that there was still confusion among or about the second coming of Christ, and some were shaken from Paul's mind, and perhaps a false teacher claiming, it was like a false letter claiming to be from Paul was being circulated when you read the chapter 2 verses 1 and also verses 2. And Paul made it very clear that the second coming will not take place for a long time. And so a great falling away from the faith will come first, and the man of sin will be revealed, as we can read in chapter 2 of 2 Thessalonians, verses 3 to verses 12. And so, friends, false teachers often charge the New Testament writers with teaching that Jesus will come back in their lifetime. And in fact, the opposite is true. Some at Thessalonica did believe this, but Paul corrected them. A second, Paul corrected them, and also now we come to a second problem that Paul corrected in Thessalonica, was that some Christians had quit working. Today's morning, I was communicating with my brother. We were communicating in Messenger today morning, and he was kind of, "Hey brother, what do you do to get money? What do you do for a living?" And so I was telling him I work as an online freelancer. I get some online tasks, and those some are very technical and hectic, and with some small amounts where you have to work for a bigger time to get like maybe $5 after working for 5 hours. And so we follow the same example that Paul comes to correct in the book of 2 Thessalonians. Some Christians just lazy around and they do not want to work, so they just want to beg and ask from others. But that's not the right way to go. We should try as much as possible to work and do something at least to get us food. And so that was the second problem in Thessalonica that Paul corrected. We find that some Christians had quit working and they were living off others. But Paul taught, "Even you will not work, neither let him eat," in chapter 3 of verses 10. So Paul taught that those who were too lazy to work, and indeed all disorderly saints, should be withdrawn from, in verses 6 of chapter 3. So, friends, I so much hope that we also going to follow and to heed the same teachings as Paul comes to correct the false ideas that the false teachers were teaching in Thessalonica. And so we can follow what Paul comes to correct and what Paul writes in the book of 1 Thessalonians and in the book of 2 Thessalonians. Thank you so much for listening to me, and God bless you so much. I hope to meet with you again here for another lesson tomorrow, which will be part of our worship service. God bless you. Meet you tomorrow. Bye bye.